Check 1, 2. Loud, good. Yes, sir. Check, check. All right, everybody, I'm going to get started. Thank you so much for coming out today. This is Testing Endpoint Protection, how anyone can bypass next-gen AV. And if my voice is a little hoarse, I apologize. I was screaming loudly along with Sublime last night. Anybody else attend last night? Yeah, it was awesome, right? Great show. All right, thanks. So just a quick overview of the talk. I'll give you a little background on who I am, background on how this talk came to be, our testing methodology, the results of our testing, and then a conclusion, some Q&A. But as I was putting this talk together, I realized that I really missed the boat on the title. It really should have been, "You can bypass next-gen AV, you can bypass." All right, I won't torture you with that. So I'm Kevin G. I'm Principal InfoSec Architect at Dick's Sporting Goods. I love passwords and GET requests, poorly handled sessions, long walks on the schema. I got about 20 years in the game. I'm an in real life graybeard, as you can see. And I'm kind of a rover with application security background, network background, and architecture and design. I do not spend my day dropping payloads on endpoints and trying to get shells. That's not what I do. This was kind of outside my wheelhouse for this particular stuff, and that's what I hope makes it a little more interesting. And I'm a little bit noisy. I've done some talking for SANS, B-Sides, IC Squared, and this is my fourth time and final time speaking at Derbycon, and that makes me sad. But all this slide is to tell you that I've seen some things. I've seen things that can't be unseen. That's, you know, if you do this long enough, you won't make that same face. This is information security at Dick's Sporting Goods. You're just trying to, you know, live the brand, stay healthy, and you're fighting invisible bad guys. You don't know where they are. All right. So the background on how we got here. So we were evaluating next-gen AV solutions because of reasons. We found our existing solution was insufficient in a number of ways. So we decided to go another direction. And we got from our CISO a make sure it's good directive. He really wanted to give us the time to make sure that it's decent and can do the right stuff. It was a team effort with buy-in from management, which I think is rare. And that's why I wanted to give this talk, because I think few organizations the size of ours have the opportunity to really do a good deep dive on the solutions that they're going to be implementing and choosing and spending a lot of money for. So that's why I wanted to come here and talk to you today. And one of the things that we really want to do is try to cut through the noise. How do we cut through the noise? Well, let's define noise. I'm sure you're familiar with some of this stuff. Machine learning and AI, right? Who hasn't heard that about every single security solution that's being sold to us today, right? Firewalls do it, SIEM solutions do it, endpoint protection products do it. So, this is a set of words that kind of make the hair on the back of my neck stand up, because everybody seems to have it. So some of these were quotes that I pulled directly off of some of these vendors' websites. So 99.95% effective. That sounds pretty darn effective, right? All threat vectors. You cover all threat vectors. Wow, you know all the threat vectors? That's impressive. I didn't know anybody knew all the threat vectors. Advanced threat actors and nation-state attacks. Okay, that's a pretty wide-ranging, bold statement about some serious people with a lot of money. And the vendor-guided demos will always work. That's the thing. If you have a vendor that wants to guide you through a POC, it's almost guaranteed that it's going to work the way the vendor expects. Now, this is what it looks like when a vendor detects malware they provided to you. They're essentially giving themselves a high five, like, hey, we the thing that we told you we were going to block, So about the methodology, we tried to kind of put this into 4 groups. The first was using the Atomic red team tests, which I actually got from one Ryan Volok, who I saw walk in. He's here somewhere. There he is. Ryan suggested that we use this as a part of this testing, and it actually let us see some really interesting stuff. And then we went out and snagged some real, actual malware. So let's take stuff that's infecting people right now and see if this next-gen AV stuff will actually block it. And then we kind of lumped this into all in one category, potentially unwanted programs, adware, and coin miners. They're all kind of these annoying things that you don't necessarily want in the environment. They're not really going to do a ton of bad things, but you don't want them in the environment anyway, so we should detect and block them if we can. And then custom payloads of varying obscurity, which is monkey armed with GitHub, okay? So we're just talking about some payloads that are generated out of a couple different frameworks and call them back to a server that we control, and let's see how these things behave. So let's talk about prep. Do not test on your production network or endpoints. That's number one. I know it's really exciting to try to dig into something like this. You're ready to party, you're ready to go, and then you install ransomware all across your network and everything's bad. So don't test in prod. Use some VMs, some throwaway boxes, and have a test network that's not connected to anything important. Put it off on an island. This is really dangerous stuff when you start playing with it. So Atomic red team. So what this is, if you're not familiar, it maps to the MITRE ATT&CK framework, and it's about 200 tests across Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. So you can, I'm not going to go into MITRE ATT&CK framework. I'm sure everybody's heard that 100 times at this point. But it's just kind of an outline of tactics and techniques, behaviors, not signatures. So we're interested in detecting the actual behavior the technique that an attacker might use. And it's under active development. There's lots of tests that are still needed. I think there's probably another 200 that still need to be mapped out to an actual test. So if anybody wants to take a look and contribute, I think that's a great place to contribute. These are the overall like high-level things that the Atomic Red Team tests map to. You see things like persistence, lateral movement, data exfiltration, initial access, all this stuff. And that's all really good, but for our purposes, we were really just interested in these 4 things. We weren't really digging in too much on if the solution could detect data exfil. We're really interested, can an attacker gain a foothold? Can they get their code to execute? Can they elevate their privileges? That sort of thing. Can they dump credentials? Those were the most important things for us. And so some of the results, most of these were detected by all the vendors that we chose. And just a little bit on that, we had started with a list of 5 different solutions, whittled that down to 2 top contenders, and then proceeded with testing against those top 2. I'm not naming names because NDA, and that's BS. But maybe if you catch me down in the lobby, I like Knob Creek. Tends to loosen me up a little bit. One in particular that did not get caught was squibbly-do, which, if you're unfamiliar, this was a term coined by Casey Smith, also known as Sub-T, back in 2016. And it's basically this, where you're using regserver32.exe to call out to the internet, pull down a payload, and then execute it, passing it to the scrub BJ DLL. So in this case, we pointed to a GitHub-hosted SCT file that launched calc.exe. So harmless exe, right? But the behavior was weird. You shouldn't really see this in your environment too much, okay? And it ran, and that was surprising to me. And the vendor response was, well, calc.exe is not malicious. So tried to take that in a little bit, took a drink of my coffee and said, okay, so it sounds like you're relying on a signature or a hash or a reputation score as opposed to a TTP or behavior, right? So that's a horrible response. It's damaged goods, do not accept. And we were able to have some additional bypass success with obfuscation, just putting some odd characters into the command line, and it goes right past. So let's move on. Real malware. So where does one get real malware, first of all? Well, there's actually a lot of places you can do it. One excellent source of malware for us was our email gateway. Lots of stuff coming in there, and it's actually getting blocked, but then it's there in a nice preserved place for you to pull it down and then run it against your off-network VMs. Repos. There's actually a thing called the Zoo, which it's a GitHub repo, and you can pull the thing down and it has all kinds of malware samples that you can test against. It's a little bit stale, so email gateway is actually a lot better in that respect. We used one that was somebody had tweeted out, and he actually had a really fantastic list of very fresh malware, but it's offline now, and I don't know what happened to it, so unfortunately I can't include it here. And then some of the analysis tools like AnyRun and Hybrid Analysis, you can actually get copies from them as well, which is super helpful, if you want to actually go through with all this. So the results. We had about 100% detection rate on this stuff. Now, our samples were days and weeks old, so it's almost expected. I mean, it's not surprising because your AI, people, should have machine learned, written a signature for this already. You would expect it if it was some kind of ransomware that was released a week ago that by now these new solutions would be able to pick it up. And they did. So then we moved on to the potentially unwanted programs and stuff. These are easy to find because everyone wants to give you one. They're super excited to give them to you. So they're not, again, not super malicious, but they're not super helpful either, and still worth mitigating. Again, this is just adware stuff, coin miners, that sort of thing. It was a little bit hit or miss on detection and prevention. The one place where everything seemed to struggle was in-browser coin miners. And I think that's why you see the browser vendors starting to move towards, like Firefox just did a release where they're actually blocking coin miners in the browser, which is the right place to do it. Maybe these solutions aren't digging into the browser process deep enough to be able to say, okay, a browser's doing something it shouldn't be doing. A coin miner might spike a CPU in the same way that a Flash application might, but it was definitely a challenge. And weirdly, the previous gen AV, a signature-based AV, was actually a little bit better in detecting the installers for this stuff for whatever reason. Okay, so now we move on to the good stuff, the custom payloads. So the goals were, again, just to recap, we're trying to successfully execute a stager payload that then calls back and gives you an interpreter shell, escalate privileges with get system, and then dump creds using Mimikatz. Like nothing, nation state here, nothing super advanced. This is all very straightforward. And I apologize if we got any red teamers in here. This is standard stuff for you guys all day. I totally understand. This is meant for blue teamers who just want to test their endpoint solution. So I fired up my instance of Kali Linkox. I love that thing. And went to town. So we did some vanilla MS Venom, some evasion frameworks that I was able to dig up on GitHub, and then some other newer style attacks that have been discussed here in the last year or two using PowerShell and C# and that sort of thing. And it was nothing I wrote. Again, monkey armed with GitHub right here. So with MS Venom, it's for those that aren't familiar, it's part of Metasploit. It replaced MSF payload and MSF encode in 2016. It lets you create various payloads with an encoder, and you can even combine an exe with some of the stuff with the payloads it creates. So you can take a legitimate exe, notepad.exe, something like that, and insert a malicious payload into it. And we were really concentrating on reverse TCP and HTTP payloads, because if you get the person to double click the thing, it's going to call back to you, and then you can go to town on your next steps. So some of the evasion frameworks that we tested as well, Veil evasion is pretty well known. It's been around for a while, not super obscure. Phantom evasion was another one that was interesting because it's under active development. There was new versions coming out as we were testing, which was great, because when we test one version and then all of a sudden a new one would come out and test that one, and oops, bypass something. Magic Unicorn, which is a trusted sec product. Mr. Dave Kennedy talks about this a lot, about how when he changes it, Microsoft immediately somehow magically comes out with an update for Defender. I found this one called the Fat Rat, which I had never ever heard of at any talk anywhere. And this was really like a interesting kind of front end for MSF Venom, where you could go through and choose the type of payload that you wanted to do, like what kind of callback you would want or whatever. And then it would just go out and do all kinds of different encoders. It would do all sorts of obfuscation, just run it through the different MSF Venom encoders a bunch of different times. So it was just kind of automating doing that kind of stuff manually. And it was interesting and successful in a couple cases. And then I also found Shelter, which is, there's a free version of Shelter out there, but then there is also a paid for pro version. But we didn't do the pro version because, again, monkey armed with GitHub, right? Monkeys don't have money. We just wanted to go out there, see what we could do without paying for something fancy. And then some of the other stuff that's out there, not PowerShell and NPS payload. This is a Ben 10 thing. These, not PowerShell is essentially an exe that is not PowerShell, but you can feed it PowerShell commands and it'll interpret it and do things for you. Sharp Cradle, which is an interesting kind of way, it's really like a post-exploitation thing. So we assume we're already on the box, and we could get Sharp Cradle there, and Sharp Cradle will go out and download C# binaries and execute them on the endpoint. NetPE loader, same kind of thing, post-exploitation, and Sharp Attack, Sharp Exploit, which is more of a recon type of tool, but it gives you like some really heavy-duty recon capabilities. So you're not actually going to pop the box, but you might get a really good idea of what's going on in the environment. Definitely not a normal thing to have there, so wanted to include it in the testing just to see if it got detected. Oh man, I'm really moving here. Okay, so results of the custom payloads. We did about 62 generated and tested. They range from EXEs to HTAs to Office documents with malicious macros, all the kinds of things that you would expect to see an attacker throw at you. And sorry, not sorry, Red Team, if I burned your stuff. I hope I didn't burn your stuff, because you should have better stuff. You should not be using the generic stuff that's sitting out on GitHub. You should have your own secret sauce and, again, Orangutan armed with GitHub. I thought this was interesting. This was a screenshot that came from the Fat Rat, where they're like, "Don't upload the virus total." Well, but that's not a security control. Like I didn't upload the virus total. I put it on an endpoint that uploaded it to their AI machine learning cloud, and they ended up writing a detection for it or something like that. So, of the 62. We had about 40% that bypassed the previous gen antivirus, and we're done here. There's nothing else to really dig into. Once that thing executed, it called back. Previous gen AV isn't doing anything else. It doesn't care if you get system on the box. It doesn't care if you move laterally or dump credentials, right? That process is now running, and it's going to do whatever you want it to do, because the signature was missed. About 20% of the detected payloads still executed, which was interesting. So even in some cases there was a detection, there was no prevention or anything to actually stop moving forward. About 4 out of 15 detected at the privilege escalation or process injection layer. So either when we tried to elevate privs to get system, or if we tried to inject into another process, to make it, inject into Explorer.exe or some other process that's normally running on the box, 4 out of 15 got detected at that point, which was interesting. We had an average of 5 bypasses, 8% per next-gen AV vendor. So that's a little different than 99.95%. It was actually pretty surprising, and not great. It's not perfect for sure. The most successful payload was NPS payload, which is about 2 years old. So for whatever reason, folks haven't poked around on GitHub enough, or just don't know about Ben 10 or Trusted Sec. This was an extremely successful payload. It got past all of them. And detections took between 24 and 48 hours for a detection and prevention to be written by the vendor. Now, and I say in POC mode. So what that means is, while we were doing our POCs, the vendors were watching their computers very closely, watching what was going on, very, very interested in what we were doing, because we were, taking a much deeper dive than most of their customers were. And then, when they would see something, suddenly a prevention would be written and in place. So, it's not clear if this is a real life type of situation. If we weren't in POC mode, if we weren't under the microscope and them watching our every move, would their detections be written so quickly, or would it take a longer amount of time? It's tough to say, and that's one question that I don't think we can really answer. So this was the expectation, you know. I thought this was going to be like an almost impossible thing to do. You know, this stuff gets a lot of marketing and all that. But the reality was, you know, basically just walked right out onto GitHub, opened fire, and laid waste. So that was definitely not expected. So I apologize. I've been really hustling here, but we're only 20 minutes in and we're getting towards the end. Some conclusions. Let's talk about this one. 99.95% effective. Check. They get that one. Because numbers are interesting. If your sample set is 20 years worth of malware, then 99.95% effective is an easy, not easy, but it's a pretty easy thing to hit. I mean, there's so much malware over the last 20 years, right? So that number can be adjusted. Now, if they came along and said, well, 99.95% effective in the last 5 years or in the last year, that means a lot more because now we're shrinking down the window and saying, well, you know, more modern. We're only looking at the modern stuff, you know, things like ransomware, which didn't exist in the 90s, you know. But they do get to make this claim. So, all right, check mark. All threat vectors. No, you don't get to make that one because you didn't think about this threat vector, monkey with GitHub, you know. Advanced threat actors and nation state attacks, that's a dangerous one. It's a bold statement. I'm not going to say that it's not true because I don't know. You know, we haven't, as far as I'm aware, seen any nation state attacks, you know, in our POC environment. And, you know, maybe you do, but it's a really tough one to prove. I'm just thinking it's a pretty bold statement because nation state attackers have zero-day exploits. Eternal Blue, the recent stuff that came out about the smartphones that were, you know, for 2 years owning iOS and Android devices all across the board. That was a nation-state attack. And so, you know, if you had one of these next-gen AV vendors out there, maybe your phone would have been protected. I don't know. Oh, yeah, and I have a note here that says 99.95% of uptime still means 22 minutes of downtime per month. So just to talk about those interesting numbers again. So as far as the vendor claims and what they say this stuff can actually do, this is not fine. Like you can't say these things without, you know, some real good information to back it up. So it's definitely better than the previous generation, right? It's definitely better than a signature-based AV. We can say that absolutely for sure, without a doubt. It does rely on signatures in some cases. I showed you the squibbly-do thing, right? That was absolutely a signature-based detection. You know, they were not looking at the behavior there. And, you know, hashes are a signature. Global local prevalence can kind of be a signature. So, you know, the machine learning AI stuff, you know, I think they're getting ahead of themselves a little bit by claiming that. But that's just my opinion, man. When it comes down to it, there is no substitution for good logging, high signal correlation, and skilled threat hunters, period. There's no machine learning that is going to go and be able to chain together a bunch of events and say, oh, that's an attack. And that's just what it comes down to it. Now, the good thing is that some of these next-gen AV and EDR vendors, they actually do have a human component that comes with it in the form of either an MSSP service where you have, you know, third-party eyes on glass, or you know, something that gets flagged as suspicious and then flagged to a human to go do the analysis. And we saw this in a few cases in our testing where we get past them, and then it would end up in a queue of, you know, things to look at, and then the next day we'd have a detection and you know, an alert saying, hey, we think something bad happened here. So that's good. It's a good approach for sure. And the enhanced logging that you get from some of these tools can help you build better alerts and better detections, which is great. So that's that's definitely might help you do things like not deploy additional endpoint agents for more deeper logging. And doing this type of testing can really help you understand your weaknesses and help you understand issues with the products that you might own. The reason we kind of wanted to put the methodology out there is so that you can go back to your own environment and do your own testing and see how well the products that you have implemented actually do. You can follow this exact same path that we did, and see what's out there, see where your problems are and where you might have gaps. And if you do know that there's a particular weakness in this product, then you can be on the lookout for things that are going after that weakness. So again, I didn't write any of the stuff that was that presented here. You can get references to all the GitHub repos and all the people who worked on those repos. Please go here and give them the proper amount of love, because the fact that this stuff is sitting out there for anybody to pull down and mess around with was extremely helpful for us. It made us make sure that we made a good decision about our products and about what we were about to spend a ton of money on. So definitely check that out if you can. And there is no I in team. I just want to give a shout out to my team members back at Dick's Sporting Goods who helped participate in the testing and get all this stuff done. And question time. Sir.
So was there a clear winner in this evaluation, or did you have to rely on non-functional requirements?
So the question is, was there a clear winner? And I will say yes. For us, there was. And it was really because of the human component that I talked about. They had a human component that was looking at anomalies, digging deeper on things, that looked weird but got passed, but then were flagged later as, why did you get passed? Sure. Question is, did we include non-Windows operating systems? And we did, yeah. We had a combination of Windows, Mac, and Linux, then various flavors of Linux. Sir?
Did you make significant changes to configuration, either by yourself or directed by the vendor in terms of more advanced scanning versus less advanced scanning?
Yeah, the question was, did we make any configuration changes around more advanced, more aggressive scanning versus less aggressive? And yes, we did try to bump up into the most aggressive detections for all of them, just to really put these things through their paces. Yes?
Did you happen to read that publication about the silence, bypass, masking program to make it look like it's part of a game? Did that influence your testing at all?
So the question was around the recent silence bypass by making it look like a game. That came out after we were done, but it wouldn't have impacted our testing because we didn't test that product. Yes?
Did you have any false positives in your testing?
Did we have false positives? Yes, but they were relatively low, which was good. They're just, you find out what all the weird things are in your environment when you start doing stuff like this. And we had a couple processes that, were totally normal for us, but, a lot of the products that we tested kind of were like, what is going on here? This looks shifty. So to get those false positives turned down, you either had to contact the vendor themselves and say, hey, this is completely normal for our environment, even though it looks like weird behavior, or you could flag them yourself and say, no, this is normal.
Is that the only control you had on the box, or did you have some kind of whitelisting running as well?
No, we were just purely testing this stuff. Sorry, the question was, did we have anything additional like app whitelisting? And no, we did not. Yes.
Did you wish you would have tested something that you found out later after the testing?
Question is, was there anything that we feel like we should have tested that we did not after the fact? And I don't think so. I mean, the thing about it is, even though we did have a lot of time to go after this stuff and really dig into it pretty deep. We did have a time box. We were up against renewal of the previous solution, and plus we have other work to do. I mean, when it comes down to it. So if we could have had more time, I think we would have tested more things. We would have found more weird payloads, to throw out there. But no, unfortunately, yes.
When you tested against the stuff in your mail gateway, I'm assuming you didn't just test against stuff that was already blocked because it was malicious. Did you run all attachments and all links to it?
We were looking for, so we were assuming, okay, the mail gateway caught it, but can the endpoint solution catch it? So we took, some pretty fresh stuff, things that were only a couple days old max, and then ran it as if the mail gateway wasn't there, like as if somebody had, for example, gone to a webmail and they came into them via webmail, downloaded, click, boom. Yeah.
How did you handle, did the product you deal with connect back to a central network? Were your endpoints online or offline when they were scanning?
They were online. Yeah.
They were able to go back to some central CNC if they want to central cloud if they wanted to.
That's correct. Yeah. So the question was, did we have the systems online so that they could communicate with their cloud intelligence platform? And we did. We wanted to be a little bit fair about it and say, okay, if the solution is operating as intended, could we bypass it? Yes.
Did you run any active attacks against the endpoint to try to bypass protections or just to bypass the software self-defense mechanisms?
Right. So the question was, did we do anything to attack the system in such a way to cripple the endpoint protection solution? And the answer there is no. I know that there was a talk yesterday on Next Gen AV where they did do that. They would do things like change permissions on folders or disconnect from cloud, disconnect the system so it couldn't talk to its cloud intelligence and that sort of thing. And we did not do that testing. But that talk from yesterday is online right now, and if you're interested, I would definitely recommend taking a look because those guys did that kind of testing for sure. Yeah.
So you mentioned building a test environment to do this in, which is obviously a great idea. Did you base that on your standard builds that you already had? Was that a hard thing for you to set up?
So question around the test environment. Did we try to mimic the environment that we already use, the images that we already use? And the answer there is yes. Yeah, we wanted to test against things that looked like what we use. Absolutely. Yes, in the back. The question is, did we automate the testing in any way? Not the actual execution of payloads itself, but generation of payloads. I did run write a couple simple scripts just to automate all types of a particular reverse HTTPS payload, for example. Like run it through all these different types of obfuscation, just so it was quick and dirty. Here's 20 payloads real quick. Picture, yes. Standard user, yeah. Yeah, the question was the user standard or administrative, and we were just going after standard users and then trying to elevate up to an administrative or system type account. Yes. Yeah, question is, did we test containment, which a lot of these new solutions have, where you're essentially disconnecting it from the network, and now it can only communicate with the central cloud thing, and we did test that out, and those were successful, even in a situation where we bypassed, because the system's already the system's infected, but you haven't we didn't tell it all right, kill communications with the cloud. Like we didn't go to that next step. We were still able to contain even though we had system on a box. Yes, white hat. Did we map successes and failure to MITRE? No, we didn't. The majority of our successes fell into those 4 categories from the MITRE attack framework, and So we considered a success if we hit all 4 of those. So kind of, you know. Anybody else? Yes. How much time did we have for a test like that? And it was about 2 weeks per product, is that right? Yeah. Yes. That's a good question. Question is, does our NDA expire at any time? I will check with our legal team. Yeah, it's unfortunate that they place that kind of restraint, you know, because you've seen other situations where, you know, I think there was a guy who had bypassed Sentinel-1, and he actually got sued, you know, or some legal action was taken against him. You know, it was like, well, this is not part of the license, and how, by the way, how did you get a copy of this? And you know, he wasn't under NDA, but somehow had a copy of the software, which requires you to be under NDA. So, yes.
One more. You mentioned that the vendors were watching. What level of additional vendor support did you have while you're running the POC compared to any regular Tuesday?
So yeah, the question is, you know, the vendors were watching. What additional type of, I guess, watching were they doing while we were doing the POC? So that's a good one because it reminds me of a particular request I got from one of those vendors where we bypassed their solution, got system, dumped creds, Mimikatz successful, and they said, well, could you, here's this additional logging tool. Can you run this and then run that again? So that's the kind of support they were giving us. You know, they were because you know, if a successful attack happens, you're not gonna give it to your customer and be like, hey, can you give us additional logs so we can write a detection? You know, so it was kind of down to that level. As far as, you know, how closely otherwise they were watching, I mean, we know that they were watching very closely because we were having, you know, almost twice weekly calls with them. You know, and they were constantly asking, how are things going? You know. And when I would get on the phone, they didn't like talking to me, and that's how you know. Yeah.
What process injection techniques did you test, and did remote versus local make a difference?
So it was really just once we got Meterpreter shell, migrate into another process. That was all I was doing, and it was, you know, on the payloads that got bypassed, it was most of the time successful. There was 4 out of 15 where we got caught out as we did that. Yes.
Did any of the vendors threaten to take a legal action against you for anything on the project?
So the question is, did the vendors threaten legal action because of what we were doing? No, because we kind of laid the groundwork up front. We've told them right out of the gates, so like, look guys, we're going to do a very deep amount of testing on our own systems. So it's not like we're attacking somebody else, a system we don't own. We're really attacking our own systems to test the you know, efficacy of their products. And they were good with that at the beginning. Yeah. So the question is, did they know I was going to get up here today and talk about next-gen AV, you know, not being perfect? No, we didn't talk about publishing results or anything like that. The NDA says, you know, you can't talk about specifics around our products. I haven't done that. So that's really where I thought it was, you know, we're still within our box. Anybody else? A lot of great questions, and I thank you so much for them, and I thank you for coming in here today. Have a great Derbycon, everyone.